Oh, whoa. That's really bad. Basically, we got to call Phil Swift because that's a lot of damage. In the last video, we learned that my neglected, cheap 2003 Mustang SVT Cobra has low compression in one cylinder. On the driver's side, we're down to about 50 PSI. All the other cylinders were up about 165, 170. There's a serious problem in that cylinder. Further, I did a leak down compression test and found that it appears that we have a ring issue, or piston or ring issue. All the pressurized air is making its way back through the oil pan and into the breather system. So regardless, this motor needs to come out. It's got leaks, it's got a bad piston or ring, it needs a clutch. So the whole drivetrain's coming out. We're just gonna bite the bullet, take the whole thing out, and we're gonna go through it. Started that in the last video. Got the intake off, got some of the, radiator and coolant tanks and fans and all that stuff. Batteries out, threw away some of the crappy HID wiring. Just freed up some room up here. Inside, got the center console or bezel taken apart. Got the sound deadening stuff off. Shifters ready to roll. Handles off. Shifter knob is off. Everything I think is done in here as far as removing the entire drivetrain. So I'm gonna get right to work in this video. You guys know what we gotta do. I know what I gotta do. I think I'm gonna start from here at this point. I'm gonna close the hood, raise the car up, and do what we need to do on the underside. So removing the exhaust, removing the drive shaft, draining fluids, things like that. I've already drained the coolant. And then we can bring it back down and start tackling the engine bay. I'm gonna remove the supercharger, hopefully make it easier to get the engine crane attached, and then remove the tons of other stuff that's gotta go into this. But let's get right to work. You guys sit back, relax, and enjoy. Let's get this motor out and see what the damage looks like. Missing bolt down there. Possible lean condition. That's always nice. getting somewhere. You know, it's funny, I was just looking back on some of the video footage of the Screaming Yellow 2004 Cobra that I did earlier this year, and just comparing this engine bay to that engine bay, which I'll put in right here. It's just pretty wild how, you know, the difference in level of care that some cars get, you know, from one car to another. It's just like this car, I mean, it sat outside for probably at least a year and obviously wasn't all that well maintained before that, but like, it's just dirty. And normally I would have, you know, vacuumed out the valley, and I sometimes even like to start with a pressure wash with this car, but this build kind of escalated, whereas, you know, once it got on the lift, one of the spark plug threads is already blown out, and, you know, we know that the bottom end or the pistons need work, probably. Who cares at this point? So here's what we got. Got a lot of the motor, or at least stuff that needs to come off to take the motor out, off. This is the pulley bridge, coolant crossover, some coolant pipes, throttle body. Got the entire behemoth of a supercharger, the intercooler's in there, lower intake, fuel rails, injectors, all that stuff off in one shot by myself last night, which was a ton of fun. Not really. So we're left with a relatively bare engine bay. I've got all sorts of vacuum lines undone, you know, brackets and stuff. I'm working on getting the power steering undone because the plan here, change of plans, I think I'm going to drop this thing out the bottom. That seems to be the general consensus on these cars. I know that it can be done out the top, but what's really holding me back is the long tube headers in this car. Apparently long tube headers is a real game changer. It's already tight, and the long tube headers just make it worse. So if you think about coming out the top, you can barely even see, but the headers are probably going to drag on there. And then even more important over here, that steering shaft down there is just, you know, snaked in there. Gonna make for a really difficult to come out the top without hitting anything. And then also on the bottom, you gotta lift it up at a severe angle to not hit the floorboards as you're coming up. So as I mentioned, I'd like this car to be mobile while we figure out, you know, tear down the engine, figure out what to do for a rebuild. But I think it's gonna be easier to pull it out the bottom. So worst case scenario, drop it out the bottom, engine and transmission all together, scoot the motor out, get it on the engine crane, then I can hopefully pop, hopefully it's not like 5 hours of work, but just throw the K member back in there, and then the car can at least be pushed around in and out of the garage if it needs to be. So I think inside the car we're done. Showed early in this last montage, got the exhaust out of here, the drive shaft, where did I put that? Oh yeah, tucked it under my cabinet over there next to the radiator. So there's really not a lot left to do here. I'm gonna keep plugging away. Also, real quick note, something that I've started to notice on a car like this. I think I read something online before I bought my first Mercedes where someone said a cheap Mercedes is the most expensive Mercedes you'll ever own. Meaning, obviously, you buy a cheap Mercedes, it's gonna have a ton of problems and it will nickel and dime you to death. And I think that's probably true with a lot of vehicles, this one included. Here's some of the stuff I've noticed since I started tearing it apart. So yeah, in addition to obviously all the gaskets we're gonna have to redo when we put this thing back together, I think all of these components here are original. This car has 106,000 hard miles on it, and all of the idlers are original. Listen to all these things. Bad, 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 really bad. That thing will still be going tomorrow if you left it. Come over to the pulley bridge. Bad, bad, bad. So pulleys are bad, all of them. There's two drives on this car, the accessory drive and the supercharger drive. The inner serpentine belt had about 3 minutes of runtime left on it before it snapped. So I just cut that thing out. Supercharger belt's okay, but that thing's probably not original. So that's just one thing I've found so far. I just thought that was kind of a interesting example of stuff that can, you know, really, the pulleys themselves are not expensive, the belt's not expensive, but when you need all of them and the little things start to add up. So we're gonna have to watch our budget on this build, but I'm gonna step by step bring you guys through all of it. I'm already keeping a close watch on the budget, and we're gonna go through all of it at the end. Should be really fun and really interesting. And you know, as poor of shape as this car is in, it really is kind of a testament to, these cars really were pretty reliable for what they were. I mean, guys are souping them up to almost double the factory horsepower, beating the hell out of them for 20 years. And you know, you finally get a failure once in a while. It is what it is. But what I thought was kind of cool is almost everything on this car is original as far as the main components. The blower, I don't think has ever been off the car. These are the original Ford gaskets. Of course, you could you know, take it apart and put it back together with OEM Ford gaskets. But these things are old, crusty Ford gaskets, all original Ford coolant hoses, all the original Ford idlers with the Ford part number stamped on them. You know, just thought that was kind of cool. Testament to these cars. Obviously, I've got a soft spot for them. But when you treat it like this car's been treated, I mean, it's gonna have some issues. But if you take care of them, these things can survive at crazy power levels. This car, 800 horsepower, 805 horsepower to the tire, stock, unopened long block. Same motor that's in here. Ford SVT for life. Sorry, Corvette. But getting back to the work side of things, since I've now decided I think I'm gonna try and go out the bottom, need to transition some of my work here to the wheels. Got to get the wheels off. Then I think the shock needs to be unbolted, sway bar unbolted. The springs need to come out so the A-arms can droop. And then I think it's like 4 or 6 K-member bolts. And then hopefully we can drop this thing out the bottom. And then start tearing the motor down, see what happened here. So yeah, enough chit chat. I'm gonna keep working and get this engine out, and hopefully, with any luck, next time I talk to you guys, this thing is out. No matter what I do, no matter how neat and clean I try to be, pulling an engine is always messy. There's just fluids and antifreeze and power steering fluid and motor oil, and it's, in a car like this, it's just disgusting everywhere, leaking from every orifice. I am disgusting, but we've made a lot of progress. I think we're ready to get this motor out of here. Most of the accessory drive is off, the pulley bridge, AC compressor I unbolted, and then unbolted a couple brackets, and then this whole thing kind of twisted and flipped up and pivoted over here and just rests right here. So that will be out of the way. Same kind of deal with the power steering. The reservoir is just off to the side here. And then I've got the pump itself kind of over there. You guys also saw I undid the ball joint. The sway bar is completely out of the car. Dropped the knuckle down, the A-arm down, sway bar links are still there, calipers zip tied up here. Wiring harness, main harness is unplugged from over there. We obviously did the fuel lines, heater core lines. I think I got most of the ground straps. Same thing with the A-arm on this side. The rack is just zip tied up there. So our whole power steering and air conditioning system are still full and untouched, and that's the way I intend to keep it for now. And the transmission crossmember is unbolted and supported by a jack. So at this point, I think that we are ready to try and lift this engine or I guess sounds weird to say, but it's time to lift the car off the engine if possible. I have pulled many engines in my lifetime, but this is the first time I've ever done it pulling the car off of the engine. I know how this is how it's done a lot on the assembly line, especially Corvettes, but these Mustangs are no exception. We're also going to be testing the tensile strength of everything that I forgot to connect. So that's usually wire harnesses, ground straps, potentially the steering shaft that I unbolted on one side, but I'm too lazy to unbolt on the other side. So that hopefully will snake its way through the headers as the body comes off the car. But yeah, I've got my Harbor Freight motorcycle jack supporting the K-member and the regular jack supporting the transmission. I think all that's left to do is unbolt the K-member bolts, which is, I think, 6 per side. There's 2 up there and then 2 back there. Okay, so yeah, 4 per side maybe. We're about 8 15-millimeter bolts from getting this engine separated from the car. I think with my low ceilings, I'm gonna have to take the hood off, so that's no big deal. But yeah, without further ado, let's get the hood off, get this car up in the air, and hopefully not break anything. We'll see. All right, here goes nothing. Watch that hood up there for me, will you? Ooh. All right, that's the headers on the body, just a tiny little bit, no big deal. Any wires tearing yet? No? I think we're free! Woo! Oh, what, you don't believe me? Come check it out. She's out! Sweet!
What are you talking to?
Myself. Look at this.
Whoa. What are you about?
It came out the bottom. Just lift the car off of it. Well, hey, for my first time pulling a motor from the bottom, or I guess lifting a car off of a motor, that went pretty smooth. No major hang-ups. I don't think I forgot anything, actually. Nothing tore. The only wire that was kind of hanging right there is the aftermarket wideband. Everything else we got. So entire engine and transmission harness stays with the engine and transmission. Everything else stays up in the car. So here's a good look at our 4.6 liter dual overhead cam 32 valve modular Ford V8 in all of its leaky, disgusting, tired state. Check out the date code on this valve cover. May 23rd, 2002. Looks like this was a really early motor and therefore probably a really early 2003 Cobra. So, motor and transmission. Check, out of the car. So now I need to get it on the engine crane, and we are just about out of space in here. So I gotta clean up a little bit, see if I can do something about this mess, get my head on straight, see if I can get the engine crane either out through the wheel well there, or maybe through the front, and get the motor off of the K-member there. I've already undid the motor mount bolts, so this thing should lift right off of there. I think I'm gonna try and just take it out in the position it's in. Hopefully I've got enough height here, just because I want the K-member to stay in the exact same spot, but really honestly not that big of a deal. So if I can't get it out, I'll just wheel this whole thing out, which is why I put it on my ATV jack there, get it out here, and then we'll get it on the engine stand or on the crane anyways. But yeah, let's keep moving, keep going forward. Good morning. Next day here, and progress has been made. So, clearly, got the engine separated from the K-member, ended up just scooting it out to get more room, really not a big deal. So the K-member is now pretty much bare. Motor is still on the engine crane, and I'd like to show you why. First reason being, we got the transmission separated, which is our T56 Magnum. And once I knew that this was a T56 Magnum, it's pretty obvious that it's going to have a 26 spline input shaft. But the reason I hadn't ordered a clutch yet before this was because these Cobras from the factory come with a 10 spline input shaft, which is a common weak point. But a lot of guys will upgrade when they do the clutch to a 26 spline. So I wanted to make sure I got the right clutch. So now we can order a clutch for this thing. Just wanted to show you guys, look at the amount of clutch material here by the release bearing, which is also junk. Look at this. Basically just pushing sediment off of the sleeve there. Pretty terrible. But yeah, other than that, it feels smooth in here. No major issues that I can see. The output seal was definitely leaking, so we'll get a new one of those on order. Those are a couple bucks, no big deal. Other than that, this looks good. Speaking of clutches, this thing had a nice clutch in it. This is a spec clutch, and not only is it a spec clutch, it's a twin disc, as you can see. So you got your, let's see, primary disc, floater plate, and secondary disc. And this thing is smoked. I mean, I'm getting disgusting, just clutch material everywhere, but look, there is not a lot left there. But yeah, I think that's like a $1,200 or $1,300 clutch. I was not expecting to see that nice of a clutch in here, but they definitely got their money's worth out of that. So that's that. Big news over here. I was concerned, because I've never done this outside the car before, I was concerned about getting that lower pulley off. You Cobra guys know those things are an absolute bear to get off. As I showed in a previous video, would not come off in the car, which is what I recommend doing, because the clutch was slipping. So I'd crank on that and the clutch would just slip. So what I did was got the bell housing off, which to all 157 of you that commented about the bell housing being cracked, you were absolutely right. You guys got good eyes. So did I guess. I noticed this when I was editing the video, or I guess it had already rendered, and I was just watching it to see how many mistakes I made. But anyways, it had already rendered, and I was like, screw it, I'll just deal with it later. I didn't know I was gonna get 150 something comments on how the bell housing was cracked, but yes, bell housing is cracked. It's crazy, I didn't notice that until I was editing, but I think the camera really picked it up because we all noticed it. But looking into options for this, I think I can weld this. If we get it clean enough and do it properly, we can TIG weld this back together. It'll probably be just fine. Plenty of guys that have entire sections of their aluminum bell housing missing, and they're able to weld them back together. So I think that's what I'm gonna try and do. But anyways, here's what there goes my coffee. Here's what I came up with for the rear. So obviously, if you're trying to turn the crank pulley off, you need to somehow hold the motor from turning, which in the car is easy to do. Just put it in gear and put it on the ground. On a motor stand, you got to do something to hold the flywheel. I don't have a Ford flywheel holding tool. I have an LS one, so I made my own here. This is the first piece of scrap steel I found in my scrap pile. Just made a couple holes in it. I tried to have 2 places to hold on the flywheel, but my holes weren't lining up, so I just said screw it. Bolt there in the block, bolt there in the block, and then 1 bolt into the flywheel. So that's going to hold my crank. Then I came up here to the crank pulley, which is, as I mentioned, I think in the first video, a reverse thread. So to loosen it, you need to go clockwise. So I took some heat, a 3/4 inch breaker bar, reduced down into the thing there, got the handle off my jack, and I just absolutely ripped on this thing. Also, after you heat it, give it a couple gentle whacks with the hammer. I think there's like a thread locker on this from the factory, and a couple jolts helps to kind of break that loose. And sure enough, she broke. I got the engine nice and low on the ground so that when it fell, it would only fall, 4 inches and, just screw up my floor instead of possibly killing me. Put a bunch of blocks under the oil pan so the motor wouldn't rotate so much when I was trying to turn it. But lo and behold, it broke loose. I didn't film it because I was just trying to get it done. Kind of wish I did, but yeah. You just got to get a big long breaker bar in the crank. If you had a buddy to hold the motor, that would be great. I was kind of holding it with my foot while pushing down on the bar, but I really think a little bit of heat and the tapping on the crank helped. But yeah, now that that's done, we can easily get the rest of the lower pulley off. No big deal there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly pull the flywheel off, get this thing back up in the air. We can get it on the engine stand and start tearing it down to see what the inside looks like. I'm really curious to see. So let's keep on going. Let's get back to work. All right, let's see what we got here. I would be willing to bet that the valve cover has never been off this motor. Stock, unopened, 106,000 mile Terminator motor. Looks really, really good. Huh. I'm okay with that. Parts table is filling up and the motor is getting smaller. Funny how that works. So we're making some progress. Got the headers off, motor mounts off. Would not want to do that in the car. I know that doing headers on these cars is a nightmare, as it was on my Mercedes, as with it probably is on most dual overhead cam engines, because they are just so wide. There's no room to get, between the frame rail and the K-member. But outside the car, obviously not too terrible. Lower pulley off, wiring harnesses are off, alternators off. Got a bunch of pulleys off the front. This bolt for the harmonic balancer is out, ready to get my 3-jaw puller on there. And then we can get the timing cover off, undo the timing chains, and then we can get the heads off. Got the valve covers off. This motor looks really clean. I honestly would have thought that it would have been a little bit worse, but it is absolutely immaculate in here. Cam lobes look good. There's no sludge anywhere. Super clean in the heads. The timing components look good. At least what I can see so far anyways. So, good to go. Headers, like I said, I don't know what brand these are. I don't see any markings on them. Obviously, they're not stainless. In an ideal world, I'd get a beautiful set of stainless headers for this car, but we might be going over budget considering we basically need a motor. So we might just be refinishing these. They obviously fit well, so we might have to reuse those. Looks like they used OEM Ford gaskets when they did them, so at least that's good. Definitely be doing the same when we put it back together. Here's my 3-jaw puller that I just got off of Amazon. I've always just used like a standard claw puller, and it's kind of a nightmare, so I'm hoping this makes it a lot easier. I'll leave a link in this to the description, but basically this should come out, hook on to the balancer. Yeah, I think that will work, hopefully, and then we can just yank that thing out. So yeah, let's keep moving. Let's get the timing cover off, get the heads off, see what the inside of the motor looks like. My new puller doesn't fit. 3-jaw puller it is. What did I tell you guys about these engine drip trays, huh? Purchased this when I was tearing down that LS7 for the Red Z06, and I still love this thing. Look at all that mess. It would have ended up on my garage floor. Got my little piece of cardboard as extra insurance, and we are good. No real mess other than some tools. Now, if only I had the common sense to put the cylinder heads on there. But yeah, guys, it is the next day. We are down to a short block basically at this point. Got both heads tore off last night. You know, all the timing components in the bag there. So we are basically just a short block at this point. And if you remember, this is our suspect cylinder. And to be totally honest, I don't see any catastrophic damage that I thought I would. There's definitely some scarring in the cylinder, but nothing that I would see that would cause 50 PSI of compression. So, I mean, it's hard to see. It honestly looks like a section right at the top left of your screen is missing, like it's been burned up or something. So that's potentially an issue. We'll be able to see better when we get the pistons out. The rest of them look pretty good. It might be hard for you guys to see on camera. You can tell that this one has been down for a little while. It's got like a lot more oil on it. These ones are mostly just carbon. The rest of the cylinders look pretty good. You know, I didn't put a lot of effort into cleaning up before I pulled the heads off because I knew that everything was going to be pretty much junk. What's really interesting over here is this is our cylinder that had the helicoil in it. And look at all that damage. It's like a spark plug tip or a piece of the head came off. And, you know, even though I said in the video, I'm pretty sure that this cylinder would have good compression. Now I'm not so sure. I mean, that really doesn't look good. Also, these two back here that had 170 PSI. Let's see if I can do this with one hand. With my light that's dying. Look at those. Look at those gouges. It was like 165 or 175 PSI in these cylinders. And they have huge gouges you can feel with your fingernail. So, I don't know. We'll see. This one is definitely the worst one. But, you know, so far we don't have any massive chunks of the piston gone or anything. So, we'll see. But, yeah, heads are off. No surprise there. I'm waiting on the special tool that you need to hold the cams. I was really careful about making sure that all the lifters were on, or the cam was on the base circle to make sure that the valves were closed so that if we move timing, we wouldn't strike a piston or, you know, do any damage to the heads. These might still be worth something, and we'll see. But yeah, let's keep going. Let's see. Let's get this motor 100% torn down. See what the rods, crank, pistons looks like. We'll take this oil cooler off, flip her over, dump the rest of the junk into my awesome tray here, get the oil pan off, and then take the rest of it apart. See what kind of damage we see. Guys, look at this oil pan. Look at the glitter. Oh no. Look at all the metal down near the pickup. Centered right on the pickup. What is it? Is that piston? Oh, whoa. It's so bad. Look at this. It's all sludge. Good Lord. You know, I can't remember if I got any footage of it like a day or two ago, but with the spark plugs completely out, this thing was really hard to turn over. And in addition to the gallop, you know, when I had the car running, with a brand new battery, it was really slow to turn over. I wonder if we got some bearing issues as well in here, so. That is a lot of material in the oil pan. That's really bad. I don't see anything immediately wrong up here. Here's our forged crank, stamped Ford. I believe Kellogg actually made these for Ford. There's our stock Manley rods, but we got to get this oil pickup tube windage tray off, and then we can start popping some pistons out and stuff. But holy crap, that is the worst I've ever seen, I think. Actually the LS7 was worse, but that was blown up. This car still ran. Look at this. I mean, that's not silver in the bottom of the pan. That's all just material, like bearing, I guess, maybe, or I guess some of the bigger chunks are probably piston because they're, it's missing, but who knows? That's crazy. I would have not expected to see that for the fact that this car was still running. Crazy. All right, let's keep going. Well, no matter which way you slice it, tearing down an engine always seems to make a mess. My drip tray caught most of it, but stuff drips and then you step in it and track it all around, and then you drop tools in there and then that makes a mess and whatever. But we are down to a bare block. Took everything out. This is the standard 0304 Cobra iron block, which is actually the same block that's in most of the modular V8s of this era. So really nothing special about it. 2-bolt main. Once you strip all the forged Cobra parts off and the accessories and you're down to a block like this, this is no different than the block you'd find in a Mustang GT or a Crown Vic or a Grand Marquis or any of that stuff. This is a dime a dozen block in all reality. It is in halfway decent shape except for the scarring that I showed earlier, which could probably be honed or 10,000 over and be no problem. But we are down to the bare block, and things are not looking great over here on the bench. We'll start with the first thing we took off, which was the heads. Cams look good. Lobes all look good. Like I said, the motor up top looked really clean. Get the head gasket off. No obvious signs of a head gasket issue. These should be the factory Ford multi-layer steel or MLS head gasket. And I already kind of showed you guys this, but this head, or this cylinder in particular, this is the one that had been repaired where the spark plug ripped out. You can kind of see Probably not on camera, but this hole is obviously larger. Something was bouncing around in there. May have even made its way into this adjoining cylinder, or that could have been something totally different. But a little bit of damage right there. The valves all seem to be fine. But yeah, definitely some damage there. Moving on, we took off the oil pan, which if I grab my light here, is basically 100% glitter. And now seeing the rod bearings, which I'll get to in a second, that makes a lot more sense. Or I guess I'll just go to them right now. So here's our pistons and associated rod bearings. I think that 7 out of 8 rod bearings were bad. Or I guess 14 out of 16. Look at these. These are not how rod bearings are supposed to look. These are gritty. The surface is all torn up. The anti-friction coating is all worn off. There's even like chunks of them coming out. Which is why I said, you know, even with all the spark plugs out, even with the heads off, the motor didn't turn over that well. It felt tight, which is because the rod bearings were basically eating each other. So even if this car had full compression and ran well, it was not long for this world, unfortunately. And an oil change, you know, probably would have told me that anyways. But yeah, all the missing material from these rods is right here in the oil pan. It's just this nasty, soupy, anti-seize looking glitter. And there's even some metal chunks down there too. So that is going to have to be surgically cleaned out. Moving on to the pistons, this is kind of disappointing for me because these are worth a lot of money. These Manley H-beam rods are worth big dollars. I think like sometimes up to $800-900 for the set. If we did decide to rebuild this motor, or if we went a different direction as far as recouping costs, this would be a big part of that. But a lot of these rods, because the rod bearings are junk, the rods are kind of junk too. You can see this one where it's brown on the bottom. That's from heat because the rod bearing was heating up. That's not like an oil stain that would... I already wiped these off to show you guys. Like this one would be considered what a good rod would look like. These two outer ones, that's all heat damage. So I wouldn't really consider that a good, usable, salvageable rod. Story's more or less the same over here. You got the adjoining, these two were, you know, hot. And then the big one that I wanted to show you guys, these rods are probably okay. But this is what I really wanted to show you guys. This right here, number 7, I believe, is our bad or 50 PSI low compression cylinder. And from the top, it looked okay. But then you get around the side here. Where is it? Boom. There's a complete part of the ringland that is like melted off and missing. So that is definitely the cause of our low compression right there. This cylinder probably detonated or got hot and this whole part just melted away. And yeah, then you got some scarring on this side, probably from pieces that were kind of floating around. And the result is low compression. But considering we were running on a maximum of 7 cylinders and most of the rod bearings were eating each other, I'm surprised this car ran as good as it did. I'm going to flash back to the clip when I first got the car started right up close to the engine. It was pretty whisper quiet. I mean, I couldn't personally tell that it was misfiring or anything. I could hear the gallop when you started it, but once it was running, motor sounds good. It really did sound pretty smooth. So to see all of this damage is just crazy. Also, just wanted to show you guys, these came out of a running car. Put these to the side to show you that these are not the worst rod bearings I've ever seen. These rod bearings came out of a 2008 Z06. You can see they're literally gone. It's worn down so much that it's worn away the ends. At least these ones are all still solid. This was out of a 2008 Z06 that I rebuilt before I even started my YouTube channel. That car still ran too, fired on all 8, but it had a pretty bad knock. But yeah, similar case. I drained the oil. It looked like, you know, a glitter show, and that was that. Had to rebuild the whole thing. Moving on down the line, here's our mains. The main bearings all look pretty good. They're a little bit oily and greasy right now, but they all look good. Same thing with the mains themselves. No major scarring or anything like that. They just got a little bit of oil on them. I just put them here to show you guys, but all the mains look good. Once I had all the rods out, the crank did turn freely, so clearly the rods were dragging. Which brings us to the crank, which is another part that is worth big money. These are, all the Cobras came with a forged crank, anywhere from 96 to 2004. It doesn't matter which one it was, they all came with a forged crank. Some of them were made by Ford, some of them were made by Kellogg for Ford, but they all were basically the same thing. I think some of them are discolored like this because Ford didn't do like a final heat treating process that Kellogg did or something like that. Let me know if you know in the comments, but they're the same crank for all intents and purposes. Super strong crank. There's guys that have gone, you know, 7s in the quarter mile on this factory crank. And the easiest way to tell that you've got a forged crank is these center counterweights right here. So if you've got a factory Mustang GT crank, it's not going to have these counterweights in the center of the crank. The center of the crank's just kind of open there. So this is a super strong crank. And unfortunately, because we took out the rod bearings, it took out the rod journals as well. Actually, where is it? I put it up here to show you guys. Here it is. This is a piece of metal that was wedged in this oiling passage, and I think there's another one down here that I might be able to find. Yeah, down here. Check that out. That's how bad the rods or the rod bearings were deteriorating, is the oil passage was collecting them. So basically, that one right there, that bottom part is what a good rod journal should look like. Nice and smooth, smooth to the touch. The one right next to it, not good. So basically all the other ones except for that, 8 out of 7 of these, or 7 out of 8 rather, are bad. That being said, you can turn this crank down, or I think this is a little out of the realm of polishing. You're probably gonna have to take this down 10 thou, but that's easy work for any reputable machine shop or engine builder. And I think this crank can still be saved. But still, I was hoping to take this motor apart, find 8 good rods, you know, a perfectly good crank, and it looks like we're going to end up with maybe a few good rods and a crank that's okay, but that needs some work. Other than that, I mean, these heads need repair, and at the end of the day are not all that valuable because they're the 4-thread ones. Again, like I said, the block's not all that valuable. No one ever reuses these pistons because if anything was weak in this motor, it was the pistons. They're not bad, but also they would need replacing anyways. So basically, we got to call Phil Swift because that's a lot of damage.
That's a lot of damage. How about a little more?
There is nothing but a lot of damage right here. So that's an overview of the internals of our Cobra motor, and she's all the way torn down. I've made a giant mess, so I'd like to kind of get back to square one here, clean all this up, organize some stuff. You guys will notice I've been bagging and tagging all of my parts so I know how they go back together, and I'd recommend you do the same. But yeah, let's get cleaned up here. Car's mint, man. Just needs a clutch. Am I doing this right? Is this how you do a clutch? Car's mint except for the clutch? Well, there you have it, guys. This Cobra needs a lot more work than just a clutch, but as I said in the last video, it's just the way it goes sometimes when you buy old cars like this, especially when they're cheap. So here's what we got. Basically a bunch of scrap. Not entirely. I think we can probably salvage this crank. There's probably a couple good rods. We'll see about the heads, but You know, it's funny with the red Z06, if you guys were around for that video, you know, that car had a giant hole in the block and almost all of the motor was junk except for the crank and one head and like a couple other parts. This car was running, it ran and drove in here, but the end result is the same. Most of these parts are bad in one way or another, whether they need a rework or they're just complete junk, like, you know, most of the rods are. But yeah, it's crazy. You guys saw all the material in the oil pan. This motor's had a hard life. This car has had a hard life, but you know, that's the way these cars are meant to be driven. The car lasted 106,000 miles, probably of, you know, quarter-mile passes and abuse. And we're gonna rebuild it to do just that for another 19 years, or 20 years, I guess, at this point, and hopefully another 100,000 miles. So I'm looking at a stack of parts, like a mountain of parts across the garage there that you guys haven't seen yet. I'm fully ready to rebuild this car. I've been doing nothing but, you know, working and editing and ordering parts. So I'm gonna be cranking out content on this car. So hopefully you guys are enjoying this project so far. I know I am, even though my wallet is definitely hurting. But as always, we will do a cost breakdown at the end of this, and hopefully we're into it for cheaper than we think. Been hunting for deals, you guys know me. So that being said, thank you guys as always for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. We'll catch you in the next one. I think I'm gonna need more than one of these tonight.